All right, without further ado, thanks everybody for coming today. My name is Ryan Kuntz. I'm the founder and CEO of Mammoth Growth, and we are going to talk about the warehouse first modern data stack. And with us today, we have Ben Godfredson. He's the Global Startup Program Manager at Snowflake. We've also got Vijay Iyengar, Director of Product at Mixpanel, and Eric Dodds from Growth at RudderStack. And so without further ado, we'd like to jump right in. And, in talking about the warehouse as sort of the center of the modern data stack, I want to, Ben, just sort of highlight Snowflake and, where we've come from and to, and why Snowflake really matters. I mean, if you go back, to when I started my career, we were talking about Hive and Hadoop, and then it was sort of MongoDB, and then it was Redshift, and now, we have Snowflake. And, at Mammoth, we are huge Snowflake advocates, and there's a whole bunch of reasons why, if we have a choice, we'll pick Snowflake as sort of our data warehouse. If you could, I'd love you to chime in and just sort of give everybody a little bit of a heads up on why Snowflake, is what it is and why there's so much excitement around it.
Yeah, happy to. Just quickly, my name is Ben Godfredson. I've been with Snowflake for about 7 years. So it's really gone from a startup to the enterprise that it is in that time. And in my role, I support startups that are kind of going through a similar growth phase and just enable them and develop a strategy behind their success that they're going to have on Snowflake. So a lot of these concepts are front of mind in every conversation I'm having with either early adopter new Snowflake users that aren't going to be very technical, or really data-driven startups that are going to be using Snowflake in a pretty complex way. And I think the first point I'd like to really address is, what are the technology shifts that are driving the change that we're seeing, right? Especially in those 7 years that I just mentioned, right? So from 2014 to 2015 and now, what changed to enable more and more companies to have this kind of approach? Identified a few I think are worth sharing. So on one point, it's just the capacity that the public cloud players are providing all of us, right? From AWS to Google to Microsoft, just the ability to have this unlimited capacity of compute and storage at our fingertips is kind of changing the game. I think the second point that all of our products and companies kind of touch on is simplified tools, right? You don't need the same complex skills that you needed to get a Hadoop cluster off the ground in 2013, 2014. If you know SQL, you can kind of get the ball rolling. And all the tools that are surrounding the data cloud, the data platform, the data warehouse are also coming at a very simplified approach for that. A few more, I think the data types that we're analyzing today are new, right? It's not just structured data sets we're able to get into a warehouse. We're seeing way more semi-structured data and more recently unstructured data being used.
Hey, Ben, can I interject real quick there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I mean, just to sort of jump in on that, when you talk about, just for the audience, structured data and unstructured data, maybe you could define a little bit what those sources look like and how Snowflake is able to benefit them in a way that maybe might have been more difficult before. Because I think sometimes, when we talk to clients, that's a little bit more nebulous.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I think the biggest one that we see is semi-structured data. It definitely has been for the last 5-6 years. So you think of IoT being generated typically in the form of JSON, can be coming from any different suite of different sources, but the one common link is that it tends to come in a massive amount. And previously, you were having to transform that semi-structured data, that IoT data, into a structured format before you could start getting any insights and pull any data from it. So maybe that's something you've experienced firsthand, but cutting that step out means an easier pipeline to manage, but also you're getting the data in front of yourself quicker in your team.
Yeah, definitely. And we talk about, two things. One thing you said was you get a lot of stuff with Snowflake for free. And what we mean by that is all the DevOps that goes around, standing it up and making it work. And then I think the second thing that might be a misconception with a lot of companies is this idea that it's going to be really, really expensive. And to be honest, like for that data store, and because we have all these cloud providers at our fingertips today, it's usually not the major constraint in those conversations. For example, that massive IoT feed you were talking about.
Yeah, agreed. That kind of ties into another shift, right? Which is just the usage-based model being deployed instead of having to plan 1-3 years ahead and buy up front. Just being able to actually spend on what you end up using on the warehouse takes some knowledge on how to actually use a tool like Snowflake and what the costs around it are. But ultimately, it does tend to drive to more price-effective solutions. And then I guess the last point I'd make on the technology shift is really like the surrounding ecosystem, right? I remember 6-7 years ago, a lot of companies I were meeting with were having to build their own ETL processes, build their own ETL tools. And with all the simplicity that's come on the front end and ingestion, and also the visualization, it's allowed for a lot of progression on the data warehousing side too, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely. And with that in mind, I think, one of the things that we really focus on at Mammoth is, the ability to have that connectivity into Snowflake. And actually for us, the faster we can get to insights, the better. And, with that, Eric, I'd love you to jump in and introduce yourself and maybe talk a little bit about, moving data into Snowflake and, how that data collection and identity resolution is relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Eric. And I work on the growth team here at RudderStack, and part of my job is actually managing our implementation of RudderStack and Snowflake, and in fact, Mixpanel. So we actually do this stuff for ourselves every single day. So it's kind of fun because we get to experience, a lot of the same things our clients experience. I think Snowflake is such a powerful tool. And I think one of the challenges that a lot of companies face is managing all of the various pipelines required to get the data into Snowflake. Snowflake comes with a lot of great stuff out of the box. But especially when you think about things like real-time streaming data and dumping that into the warehouse to feed all sorts of interesting analytics use cases, machine learning models, other, sort of interesting ML things you're doing on the warehouse. A lot of times the dynamic we see is that because every business has pretty unique needs, especially as they grow and scale, you start to spend a lot of time just engineering the plumbing as opposed to actually like building a data product on Snowflake, right? And so at RudderStack, we want to make it super easy to solve the plumbing problem, right? You don't have to.
Yeah, and Eric, maybe take a real quick step back and talk a little bit about RudderStack and sort of what it does and where it fits in, just for people that maybe aren't quite as familiar here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Thanks for pumping the brakes there for me, Ryan. RudderStack is a customer data platform focused on developers. So we provide you pipelines that make it easy to move customer data anywhere in your stack. So real-time streaming pipelines, so you can think about behavioral data from websites and apps, also ETL pipelines that sort of takes your traditional structured cloud data and dumps it into the warehouse, and then also reverse ETL. So something we're seeing more and more is companies that want to do some sort of analysis inside of the warehouse like Snowflake, and then push that value back out to other tools in the stack. So we're your place to come to move that customer data anywhere in the stack.
All right, great. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's great.
The connection points between the ETL into Snowflake and what you guys do. I just wanted to back up a little bit and make sure everybody knew what those pieces were.
Yeah, totally. And to get to your question, so moving data across the stack. So we make it really easy to move data across the stack. Snowflake is a primary destination for a lot of RudderStack customers. And one thing we see, you mentioned identity resolution. So one thing we see that's actually pretty hard, especially when you think about spending a bunch of engineering hours just on moving the data to different places in your stack, is a lot of times that's literally just the movement from point A to point B. And every company is somewhere on the journey of trying to build, customer 360 or single pane of glass, whatever unified profile. And the place to do that really is the warehouse. But in order to do that, you actually need some sort of way to reconcile identities, especially when you think about going cross-platform. So one of the things we see companies using RudderStack and Snowflake for is that RudderStack solves a lot of the identity issues on ingest into Snowflake so that it's really easy to make the joins that you need to join to actually build that unified customer profile. So on the incoming data, you can tie all the pieces together, whether that's from a mobile platform, website, structured cloud data. You can sort of solve the identity resolution problem. Again, just trying to make it easier for someone to actually do a limited number of joins to get that unified profile within Snowflake.
That's great. And then I want to bring Vijay back into this, and maybe you can introduce yourself real quick, and we can talk about how this how Mixpanel fits into this puzzle as well.
Yeah, sounds great. Hi everyone, I'm Vijay, Director of Product here at Mixpanel. Been with Mixpanel about 5 years in various engineering and product roles. And so Mixpanel has actually been around since before, I guess, the evolution of this modern data stack, and has historically primarily been focused on engineering and product teams getting really fast self-serve exploratory answers from their product telemetry, right? Like users using their app and turning that into insights like, what actions do users take that lead them to retaining long-term, or what kind of drives conversion in these core funnels that are relevant to your business, or even just seeing kind of active user growth over time. And what we've really seen with the emergence of warehouses like Snowflake and this broader modern data stack is that it's been a really great tailwind for us for getting richer, trusted, well-governed data into Mixpanel, so that Mixpanel is not kind of just this silo that has your raw event data, but also has kind of this core transactional events that are coming in from systems of record into your data warehouse, so that you can kind of do funnels on these really core transactional events that are relevant to your business. And second, being able to enrich the events in Mixpanel with kind of what Eric was saying, the 360-degree view of your customer or your accounts for B2B use cases, bringing that data in so that you can see, for example, not just how many unique users do I have using this particular feature, but what percentage of my revenue is associated with people using this feature, or in which geographies, or which customer success manager should I talk to for users who are power users of something that's in my product. So really being able to marry the kind of like product telemetry with this single unified profile of users and accounts is what we're seeing is the benefit of using Mixpanel alongside the modern data stack.
Yeah, and from our view at Mammoth, we have a lot of people that show up and say, I need a warehouse and I need to visualize the data. And for us, it's really about getting to the answers to the business questions in the most cost-effective way. So for example, you want to have all of that data that might come in from a separate source into Snowflake in Mixpanel. And you're not going to build a funnel report in Tableau or Looker. I mean, you can, but it'll cost you a fortune, right? And so the thing that we sort of focus on, which I think is really important and relevant to the conversation, is this bidirectional sync that exists today, where we can get source data that's maybe not customary, or maybe not something that you would see natively in Mixpanel traditionally. We have the ability to now get it up into Mixpanel and run those reports that would have otherwise in the past been, to be frank, fairly difficult. And so, Eric, it'd be helpful if you could talk a little bit about this idea of like, data in, data out, and how it relates, to what we can do in Mixpanel today, with regard to sort of what ETL, reverse ETL, and making that data sync work, because that's, I'd say, a relatively new phenomenon, and it's something that we're taking advantage of every day with our clients.
Sure. Yeah, and I'll use us as an example. We kind of picked up on this pattern from what we saw a lot of our customers doing. So we use Snowflake and Mixpanel actually, and what we see is really for Mixpanel, instead of being a linear, user performs an action and you send that event directly to Mixpanel, you add an additional layer, or you add an additional source to Mixpanel, which is Snowflake, right? So RudderStack feeds all the behavioral data directly into Mixpanel. So you have, the real-time views, you can look at, your funnel behavior, all that sort of stuff.
And it handles identity resolution in both places, right?
Exactly, right?
So then get that for free, right?
Right, exactly. Because it's the same payload, you get matching profile in Mixpanel, matching profile in Snowflake. Now, because Snowflake is a data warehouse and can handle all different forms of data, to Ben's point, semi-structured data, structured data, all of that, what we do is we pull additional information into Snowflake that, Mixpanel really isn't intended for, right? So if you think about pulling your Salesforce data in, right? Information from, whatever marketing automation tools you have, stuff from your app databases, and you actually run calculations on that. So you can sort of calculate a lead score and other components like that, right? Or other sort of what we call like lead or account intelligence. And we push that from Snowflake using our reverse ETL pipeline back into Mixpanel. And it creates this really interesting feedback loop. We call it a feedback loop, where now, because we have more user and account intelligence in Mixpanel coming directly from Snowflake, we can build richer cohorts, make better funnels, understand deeper user flows, and that unlocks more insights for us, based on what we discover in Mixpanel. And then we can actually pull the results from that from Mixpanel back into Snowflake, right? So then we can sort of syndicate that to the BI team who may want to slice data by that particular cohort, sort of augmented cohort from Mixpanel, so that they can update executive dashboards, right? And some sort of BI tool or whatever. And so you have these feedback loops where Mixpanel is getting data from the RudderStack event stream and Snowflake, creating value, and then syndicating that back into Snowflake. So it's pretty cool, and actually has already unlocked some really interesting things for our customers.
Yeah, and getting that data from Mixpanel back into Snowflake is usually super relevant to the BI team. And Ben, kicking this back to you, are you seeing anything where teams are using Snowflake and ML, and is there any convergence there, or is that still sort of in its own silo?
Well, I think one comment I was thinking of when you were all talking about that flow is just one big trend that we didn't really touch on, right? Which is just the continuous breakdown of these data silos that's occurring. You see RudderStack being an enabler of it, and then you see Mixpanel making that an aspect of their product, right? And having our CIO penned an article recently, and he talked about just because you have a bunch of cloud-based SaaS applications in your environment as a company doesn't mean you're really like a cloud-friendly or full cloud adopting company, right? You still need the ability to have a horizontal view of these SaaS applications that's in a single source of truth of some kind, right? And the benefit is Eric, what you were talking about, like the enrichment you can do by looking at two different SaaS applications in your stack and the benefits you might get from having those two data sets in the same source. So I just wanted to touch on that. I thought that was a big trend that this whole conversation is kind of touching on. And then I think to your second point, where is machine learning potentially playing a role in this? I think that's sort of the direction this is going. And it's the same trends that are driving the warehouse first evolution in the CDP space, or what's eventually driving this evolution in the ML space. And the two are simplicity, right? Lowering barrier to entry, and also democratizing the data, like having a single source of truth for your ML workloads that are in one location, and having super scalable storage on that end, right? You do not want to have a siloed out ML tool that you're having to send the data to. One of the big reasons is you're just not going to be able to run the same amount of compute and run the same amount of storage as you would if you're acting on your own data warehouse.
That's absolutely true. And I think one of the things we find is that particularly people that want to do ML projects today, the sample size is an issue. You need a massive sample. You need the ability to process and compute all that sample. Otherwise, you're just going to end up with sort of garbage in, garbage out. And for us, that accurate, reliable, consistent data foundation is really important. And we're finding that both the ability to store, but also the ability to audit and to leverage that continuous loop is making a huge difference in the conversations we're having around the data. Vijay, I'd like to bring it back to you and maybe talk a little bit about how we think about this using the operations of the data to get it into a framework where now Mixpanel can take some of this information that historically is not just identify and track and instrumented in some app, but now is being enriched and augmented by other sources, which, to Eric's point, Salesforce is always kind of a thorn in our side, because people are, oh, well, there's this closed one and there's this revenue associated with it, and maybe a pipeline stage. Typically we wouldn't mess around with Mixpanel in that context, but now we can. So are there other things like that maybe we should highlight around Mixpanel's ability to get to the truth more quickly now that we have some of this additional information?
Yeah, totally. I think, getting great insights from your analytics tool begins with trusting the data. And I think historically what we've seen is there's always this kind of painful trade-off between trust and effort, where to get high trust data, you have to put in a ton of effort, or you can put in very little effort and kind of get data that you can't really trust. And I think this ease of moving data from systems of record, which is kind of the canonical source of truth, into a warehouse, joining it into one view that's kind of managed by tools like dbt, and building like that version controlled 360-degree view of whatever entities you want that can evolve over time, and then being able to refresh Mixpanel with that kind of beats that trade-off, where you can kind of get, with like high degree of convenience, you can align on the kind of core trusted data sets and then bring them into Mixpanel for fast self-serve exploration like you always could. So I think really what we're seeing there is like it kind of it lets you get this like fast self-serve exploration on data you already trust. I think Mixpanel's superpower over something like a BI tool in addition to Snowflake is largely the exploratory nature of it, where it's kind of like, the way I think about it is kind of like Web 2.0 versus Web 1.0, rather than it being kind of a static dashboard that one person produces and everybody consumes as a static snapshot. It's really like being able to dig in and click into a spike and then drill down and zoom in and pan and create like subsegments and really get to the truth. I think Mixpanel is really, really good at that. Historically, it was a challenge to get the data in, but now I think that's become a lot easier. So you can kind of get this feedback loop, as Eric was mentioning.
Yeah, we talk about like 4 levels of data, and it starts with count, then segment, then forecast, then predict. And you can see where each of those areas, can be leveraged across all of these systems. And I think in particular in Mixpanel, we always talk about peeling back layers of the onion, right? Because the answer, to a business question ultimately and often results in more questions. Like, wait a minute, revenue. Well, who is that revenue from? Where did they come from? What did they buy? Like, how often did they buy? And so those are the kinds of things that you have to do that exploration with. And obviously Mixpanel is a great solution for that. How do you think about the difference between sort of real-time and batch data? Does it matter? Is that something that Mixpanel's well suited for? How does it tie into this warehouse-centric framework? Maybe you could talk a little bit about that. Yeah,
it's a really interesting question, because Mixpanel historically was built, our whole API and data model is all real time, and it's in the sense that events are real time. They happen at a point in time and they get sent to Mixpanel, and we ingest and can analyze that in real time. And I know there's like a kind of, it's a contentious point, because it's like who's making this like real business decisions on data that's coming in the last 5 minutes. But I think there's really like 2 big use cases for real time, even in this batch kind of centric world of the modern data stack. The first is kind of this immediate feedback loop of, I shipped a feature, put it out there, like, are people using it? Like just today, actually, Mixpanel shipped a feature, and we shared kind of this graph of like the line going up and the raw log of events coming in of like, hey, people are actually using this thing. And that kind of creates this data-driven culture internally where, people can just like, there's that excitement of just consuming, like, oh, someone in, like New York, he just signed up for this thing, or someone here just used this feature. That's kind of exciting. And then the second is, I think the data governance piece, where you can kind of, for this like raw clickstream events, you can kind of like do an event in your app and see it happen in Mixpanel instantly, and you build that cause and effect. That said, I think it's kind of a hybrid world that we're building for now, where it's kind of like you have that real-time stream coming in, and you can enrich it with this, batch created on a daily, hourly basis in Snowflake, this like enriched kind of canonical source of truth data sets, so you can kind of get the best of both worlds.
That's right. And really, look, all data isn't time series data. Right. And so I think that's where that connection happens, is that, some of these user traits can be updated whenever, and it doesn't have to happen on a continuum.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
One, just to jump in there, Ryan, with a specific example, I think Vijay's point around what is real time, it really is relative. And I'll just give one example. So we had a customer who was running sort of analytics jobs, from their warehouse, or they were loading stuff into the warehouse and basically were producing sort of their reports on a daily basis every 24 hours. Big e-commerce company running, hundreds of tests across their site. And they need to know pretty quickly, like, when one of those tests wins so that they can implement the change, and it's all about conversion rate optimization. And they actually load the behavioral data now into their warehouse and refresh dashboards every 15 minutes. So yeah, that's really fast. And it's a huge amount of data. So, but the, sort of the tech enables you to actually do that now. And so for them, they consider that real time, right? Because it's actually not practical for them to look at the dashboards any faster than that, because it's not like a test is going to change. You launch a test, it's not going to change in 15 minutes. Now, there may be some other things that you actually do want to look at a live stream in real time, but like you can account for that sort of stuff. But the warehouse is really fast. Ben, I don't know if you want to jump into that, but we're seeing a lot of companies, load data in the warehouse at an extremely high rate.
Yeah, it is bleeding into one of the questions I saw that we got in the chats. It's good that we're answering it. I think Vijay had some really interesting points. Like, I think a lot can be accomplished by batch, but there are use cases where streaming is important, and it's going to be a deal breaker for a company. I'm thinking personally, the most relevant use case at Snowflake is analyzing customer usage, right? If a customer is deploying a new warehouse, a new feature, a new product that's powered by Snowflake, it's helpful to have real-time insights, or as close to real-time as you can get, on what the associated number of users are, storage growth, compute growth, and ultimately, not Snowflake specific, but even just industry specific. I think it's a workload that will eventually get peeled off by the major data cloud providers. I don't think it's there yet, but I think that's the trend that it's going to.
Wait, can you maybe drill down on that a little bit? What do you mean when you say that there's a trend going there in that direction?
Of streaming use cases being supported by, maybe historically OLAP databases.
Okay, got it. Excellent.
I just think there's more use cases now than there have been in the past for why it makes sense to.
And then, Eric, talking a little bit about these different types of databases, how do you feel about the future of big data? Is it sort of silos or constellation of services, or what do you guys see at RudderStack and how this evolves?
Yeah, absolutely. To some extent, I think we're all trying to answer those questions a little bit, right? Like, what is, every 5 years ago, everyone was asking, what is the stack going to look like? And so today, it has a certain flavor. And so I think everyone's kind of figuring out what is that going to be in 5 years. I think we know a lot of things, right? It's very clear that, the cloud data warehouse, cloud data platform is really still going to be the center, right? And I think that comes down to a single source of truth and a lot of things that Ben mentioned. I think one of the principles that we have at RudderStack is that you need to maintain a high level of flexibility. And one thing that we see, and actually, Ryan, would be interested in your thoughts on this, is that the stack is getting more complex. It's not consolidating, right? Additional tools are being added, and tools are actually being changed out, at a fairly high rate. And so whatever the tools are, I think it will be a constellation. And I think companies will increasingly adopt technology that have the bidirectional capability to maintain flexibility, right? So that you don't have to do sort of a massive migration, or other components like that. You sort of establish your source of truth, and then you build a constellation of valuable tools around that. And I think for sure, what we will see is the bidirectional emphasis, right? Like, I want infrastructure that allows me to send data and pull data from every source and every destination to sort of maintain maximum flexibility, because I think the challenge that a lot of companies face is the business grows, it changes, it responds to the market. And guess what? We have different needs, whether that's, for data, for different components of the tech stack. And so I think being able to respond to those with agility will be increasingly important.
Yeah, well, I agree. I think ultimately we're seeing a lot of things happen in obviously the MarTech landscape or product tech landscape, or whatever you want to call it, evolved a lot, over the last 5 years. Sort of from our seat, we don't believe there's a perfect stack. It's really, for any particular business, there's a perfect stack, and it oftentimes has to do with whatever the constraints are for that business. So one, I already bought something. Two, I've got particularly unique technical issues. My team has certain knowledge capital. There's lots of things going into that conversation. I think what we're seeing is, and it's going to be interesting, is because in some sense, it's a tools arm race, right? Who can release the next newest best feature? And so I think for the consumer, that's great. And from our perspective, it's everybody kind of wins because we can take advantage of these things and tell a better story faster with the data. And so that sort of leads me into a conversation about sort of the difference between this time series data and BI, and maybe Vijay, you could speak to that a little bit about what is there ever a situation where we sort of see the in some sense merging of the capabilities of something like Mixpanel, where we know there's this massively rich ability to explore and view the time series data, but also now with this bidirectional sync where I can get data into Mixpanel that before I would only think about surfacing in, say maybe, a Looker or a Tableau. How do you guys think about that? Because, that's to me an exciting trend that, opens up some opportunities from a reporting perspective, that we didn't have in the past.
Yeah, totally. I think one of the kind of core insights we had early on at Mixpanel that I think we still strongly believe is that events, when it comes to time series events, are kind of the universal data model, in the sense that they're really simple. Like when something happens in the real world, an event, that is an event, right? It has a person that did the action, details about the action, and a timestamp. And events kind of have this natural chronological order and allow you to see kind of cause and effect. This happened before something else. And so what we're seeing is by building kind of this like event native user experience and database and data model, it's really easy to model kind of core kind of user flows. Like a funnel kind of is somewhat universal. It's you can see a user funnel, you can see a recruiting funnel, you can see a sales funnel. So I think we see a lot of potential for this event-based, event-centric data model to model all sorts of business processes in a way that's, I think, a bit more flexible and a bit more kind of maps a bit closer to what people think about when they think about a user or company or whatever else going through a series of steps. So I think that kind of gives us the ability to model a lot of the use cases in a more flexible way than a BI tool can. I think BI is great from the standpoint of generality, right? It basically boils down to supporting anything that SQL can support, which is a kind of a much vaster ocean of answers. But I think in terms of self-serve exploration and in an intuitive way, I think something like Mixpanel, on top of these natural events that are generated from transactions or business interactions, is really powerful.
Awesome. So we've got the data store, we've got the data pipe, and we've got the data viz. And, that's a powerful combination. Any one of you guys, I want to, before we sort of wrap up for some Q&A, wanted to make sure if there was anything else that you wanted to talk about, we jump in and say today. Did I miss anything in our little chat?
I'll just jump on piggyback a little bit on what Vijay was saying about sort of time series data and your question around that. One thing that's really interesting that we've seen several customers do is actually what we call sort of manufacture events or create synthetic events in Snowflake and then send those into Mixpanel, right? So there are a lot of situations where you have non-time series data or even the absence of a behavior that is helpful to track as a time series data point. And so there's this really amazing pattern we see emerging where you can create that and you have the flexibility to do that. So they're just building these tables in Snowflake that represent these synthetic events, in sort of the time series format, and then sending them through to Mixpanel. And it's really cool. So companies are I think to summarize it, I would say the barriers around that are coming down just because you can do a lot of really different neat things with actually sort of creating events.
Oh, well, and for us, it's table stakes at this point. If the data is in Snowflake and it is something that needs to be sort of turned into some sort of synthetic event, we're going to get it up into Mixpanel and leverage it at the customer level. And also gives us the opportunity to do things in Mixpanel where we're grouping, you're grouping cohorts and doing things in a way that, again, otherwise would have been, for us, maybe more expensive in time than the value we would see out of it, because there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in data typically. And so now, again, those things sort of become table stakes and every company should be doing them.
Yep.
Any last thoughts, Ben?
No, I think we covered some really fun topics here. I think the big theme that I see across really the four, logos here is just like the same concept of breaking down data silos, right? And what benefits come with that, and what technology exists today that helps enable that, right? And Ryan, it's also, on you on some of these projects that you're working on how to connect the dots and pull that off. So I really do think Mixpanel and RudderStack stand out as two companies that are breaking down silos in a pretty unique way. So I really just appreciate, getting the invite to talk about these things. It's been fun.
Awesome. Vijay, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I think totally agree with everything that's been said. I'm super excited to get more of these richer kind of source of truth data sets from tools like Snowflake and RudderStack into Mixpanel and see what companies do and hope they surprise us. I think there's lots of interesting use cases out there.
Yeah, and from our perspective, it's all a win, because for us, it's getting accurate, reliable, consistent data across the stack and doing something with it. And that, obviously starts with, counting the data and segmenting the data and forecasting data and predicting the data in a way where it's, the organizations believe it and they have it, they have the stuff that they need. And so want to, let's see, hop on some of these questions here. It looks like, we have a Q&A box, I think, somewhere. So somebody hopping on that. I don't see it in front of me, but I know it's there. And then, let's see. So there's a question about real-time use cases for marketing. So obviously we were talking about these batch processes and getting things going. And then, to the extent that we want to talk about, these real-time use cases for marketing, where the example was, maybe somebody just completed a workout, that's an event. And, we would say, yes, there's lots and lots of those. And so maybe, if one of you guys want to jump in and talk about, where we can leverage these events in the context of marketing, or even in, the context of real-time personalization or something, where we're taking advantage of these things and leveraging them against an app or a site.
Yeah, I can jump in and speak to that. And I would say, that's actually a pretty straightforward use case. So someone finishes a workout in a mobile app, and you want to, basically sum the number of workouts they've done. And if it passes 10, then you want to, take over the screen and, have confetti and do a celebration of their 10th workout or whatever, right? And, from the RudderStack perspective, you can stream that event in there with the incremental count of the total number of workouts that they've completed. And then that's going to hit some downstream marketing automation tool that will have some sort of logic built into the campaign that says, if, a user's workout count, is 10 or, hits 10, then, sort of do this takeover. So that's actually a fairly straightforward use case. And that's a really, when we think about, the two pipelines I talked about, where you feed a Mixpanel directly, in real time, and then you also feed it, with sort of enriched data from Snowflake. The same is true of a marketing automation situation, where you can actually sort of deliver things in real time. Of course, you can also, another example we see a lot in terms of personalization, that's not necessarily like user does X and then Y needs to happen immediately, is on next type of behavior, is what we're seeing. And a lot of that's fed from the warehouse, right? So user hasn't opened the app in 3 days, and so you want to give them an offer next time they log in to increase their engagement or activity, right? You can calculate that in the warehouse and sort of push that up, as a trigger. So a lot of times it can be easier to build those cohorts in logic, or at least have them live in the warehouse, or even build it in Mixpanel, then pull it into the warehouse. And so it can be easier to sort of do that next behavior at any time type personalization using what you've built in the warehouse.
Yeah, and more importantly, using Mixpanel, you can define what events are actually important. So, is it finished the workout, or has it started the workout, or has it got halfway through the workout? There's so many things, that we can key on in order to determine what those events that are going to ultimately result in the trigger are. And, we would leverage Mixpanel to understand, each of those pieces.
Yep.
Vijay,
did you have something to add there?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think if for the pure real-time use case, I think RudderStack works great in terms of routing those raw events to both the marketing tool and Mixpanel. I think the other piece is around if there is something that you determine as part of your product analysis workflow, where you see that there is like a sharp drop-off at a particular step. One thing that you can leverage in Mixpanel with kind of this wider ecosystem of integrations, or with our kind of pushing cohorts out to your own servers, or to something like Snowflake, you can kind of activate those cohorts that you've built as an outcome of your analysis in Mixpanel, which again kind of goes back to that feedback loop piece.
Eric, you were going to jump in on a question around CDPs.
Yeah, and I'll read this one out because it's a little bit longer, but I think it's a great question. I love a warehouse-centered customer data approach. Can you give some insight into customer hesitancy around a warehouse-first CDP versus a productized CDP like Segment and Particle Tealium, et cetera, specifically around the speed of accessing basic things like latest event occurrences and aggregates for a given user? Basically asking about sort of a productized, audience builder, which is a really, really great question. So we're seeing some really interesting architectures around this. So one is that a lot of companies are building audiences in a number of downstream tools, right? So like Mixpanel, for example, we talked about cohorts, but you see a ton of that in terms of actually acting on the various audience traits, et cetera. In the context of sort of a marketing automation tool, sales CRM, whatever, people are building, lists, segments, groups of people. And what's really cool is you can actually, in many of those tools, trigger like outbound webhooks that can actually feed, feed other systems across the stack in real time. So we have a lot of customers who are actually sort of taking traits from audiences or things that happen in a downstream tool, hitting a webhook, sending that back through RudderStack so that it can actually syndicate that to the entire rest of the stack. The other thing we're seeing that's really interesting is companies, and this is, I think, one of the coolest architectures we've seen, basically setting up a super low latency database in the cloud that they, like a key value store that they can access via an API layer, so that you basically you're constantly populating with the event stream and from the warehouse with enriched data, a complete customer profile that lives on sort of your infrastructure and is accessible via API. And the reason I believe we're seeing that across a lot of our customers is that when you sort of outsource the customer profile building to a third-party closed SaaS tool, as opposed to doing it in something like Snowflake and then pushing it to somewhere that it's available centrally, inevitably you lose control and flexibility. And so that's just actually not working for a lot of companies now because they need to deliver more complex use cases around, real-time personalization or other things like that, where the infrastructure that supports sort of that, what we would call like a black box, sort of customer profile store, doesn't make sense anymore. So great question. I think companies are doing some really, really neat things around that space.
Yeah, and from our seat, we feel like it's kind of the first inning. We're seeing cohorts and segments and different pieces of data built in a variety of places. And again, the key is how do we sync that data across these systems in a way that provides value in each of these tools where they excel. And it obviously goes beyond just participants today. I mean, there's like tons and tons of different things that sort of touch this data-centric ecosystem. And so the more flexibility that we have in our ability to affect the customer and provide that information, the better from our perspective. All right, so I guess we can give it another minute or two if anyone wants to drop something in the Q&A. We can get some answers going. Otherwise, we'll leave it with last thoughts and wrap up for the day.
I think there's another question in there, Ryan. It looks like it might be a good one for you to tackle.
Let's see here. Oh, cool. Okay, got it. So this question's around handling transactional use cases with regard to notifying a user around some sort of policy, and having identity resolution in place can cause issues with sending the message to the wrong person. And so I think the answer is no, in the sense that for us, identity resolution again is sort of like table stakes. We can have session-based data, but if we're not tying it to a user identity in the most appropriate way, then we're losing a lot and leaving a lot on the table. And so, in the context of the appropriate identity resolution, what you're doing is you're basically taking anonymous identities and mapping them to known users through an identify call. And Eric and Vijay, you can speak more to this about how it works in your specific systems. And so often, it's unlikely that we're going to, send the wrong message to the wrong person if we're doing identity resolution right, which is sort of the point of identity resolution. And so I don't know if you guys have any, comments around that, but that's how we would sort of think about that situation.
Yeah, from my perspective, number one, great question. And I know we've all felt the pain of sort of sending the wrong thing to the wrong person and that causing, business problems. And usually
we've never done that, by the way.
in a past life.
Right.
Usually that's because you are trying to solve identity resolution sort of on multiple fronts, or even have multiple teams handling that. And I think to Ryan's point, the technology and sort of governance is there to solve it on ingest. And then whatever you can't solve on ingest, because there are always edge cases, you solve in the warehouse and then syndicate that back out. And so, it's really, I know maybe even just a couple of years ago is a huge pain point, but it really, the ingredients are there to fix it. And I mean,
and you have to go through the effort. And to your point, you do have to do it across the teams, and you do have to have governance, and you do have to have a process, right? And so that, ability to audit and really look at the data and make sure it's accurate is something that also identity resolution gives you, that you don't have in a session-based world, because you're just counting random sessions and there's no way to tie it back to, a source of truth, whether that's in something like Mixpanel, or that's down in the warehouse, or it's in a third-party system or data source that you can map that data to, to make sure that you're doing it the right way.
Yep. There's another question here. Is RudderStack aware of any marketing automation tools that run on top of a brand's Snowflake? That's a great question. Yeah, so I would check out a tool called Message Gears. It's a marketing automation tool that sits on top of your warehouse and sort of is a hand in glove fit with sort of the identity resolution and schemas that RudderStack, flows into Snowflake automatically, and sort of allows you to do sort of really powerful stuff, from all sorts of marketing automation, sort of marketing segments and all that sort of stuff. So Message Gears, I would check out if you're interested in a marketing automation tool.
I would second that. Yeah, that's who I was going to mention.
All right. Great. Any other questions? Going once, going twice. All right. Well, listen, on behalf of everybody here, I want to thank all the attendees today and thank the panelists for showing up. It was, I think, a good session, and we, took away a lot. This has been recorded as well as live. I think you can get it from the Mixpanel team or the RudderStack team or the Snowflake team, I'm pretty sure. And so, take advantage of that if you can.
Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Had fun. Thanks, Ryan.
You bet.